The behaviour during breaks here is appalling. I get very upset. Chris Bowen, welcome.
Great
Rich
to be
Owen
here,
Jones.
Graham.
Now,
Nothing to fear, Chris, nothing to fear.
Now, first off...
I always enjoy being on with you guys.
I'm very glad to hear that. Now, I want to ask you about deficits, because they appear to be a very big issue. Now, the last Labor budget promised an $18 billion deficit and it finished up at 48. That's not good enough. Do you believe that Labor did a good enough job during its 6 or 7 years in keeping budget deficits down, given the magnitude of every single one of them?
Well, we of course dealt with the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression. And that meant that the revenue coming into the government was written down, was reduced over and above what was expected. And Joe Hockey, of course, went around saying this is a crisis, this is a scandal, this is terrible administration, and now exactly the same thing's happening to him. Now, we left Australia, we left the new government with 3 AAA credit ratings from the 3 major ratings agencies. There's only 8 countries in the world who can claim that with a stable outlook. Only 8. You don't get 3 AAA credit ratings unless you leave your budget in good working order. Now, there are challenges in the budget. I've said that consistently. I've said that longer than Joe Hockey said it, that there's tough decisions necessary to make sure that we keep our fiscal health. And we can talk about that plenty tonight, I'm sure we will. But it's got to be kept in context. You've got to have a proper debate about the budget. That's what I'm engaged in. That's what I'm more than happy at any forum to argue with Joe Hockey about. The way forward is a fair way to make sure that our budget's in good health.
Well, that's the toughest that he can throw at you, Chris, so you don't have much to worry about. But hang on.
Hang on.
I've managed to read all the stuff that you've said in the last however long, and Graham did ask a very legitimate question. Perhaps we should quantify, because in a lot of those things there you talk about fairness. Do you think it's fair to pass on to your children, to his little 7-year-old, the succeeding deficits for 6 years were 27 billion, 54.5 billion, 47.5 billion, 43.4 billion, 18.8 billion, 48.5 billion. That's 240 billion in total. If you take the brand that you're operating under, as I mentioned on Q&A, if you add Keating, Rudd, Gillard and Rudd, they accumulated $350 billion in deficits. So you can talk about AAA ratings and everything. But there's this notion about intergenerational debt. Those monies are going to have to be paid back by somebody. Nothing that you've said here indicates how you're going to do that. You're either going to raise taxes. Well, you say, no, we're not going to do that. You're going to cut spending. You say, no, we're not going to touch. You've already in the last 48 hours said, we're not going to touch pensions. We're not going to touch Medicare. We're not going to touch superannuation. Now, if you've got a welfare bill of $150 billion, Social Security bill of $150 billion, a health bill of $150 billion. If you've got a pension bill of $49 billion, where are you going to...
Well, let's deal with it. Let's deal with those facts you raised. And you raise fiscal history. We can talk till the cows come home about the respective records of Labor and Liberal governments. We can talk about how Paul Keating was the first treasurer to bring down successive surpluses since World War II.
Since 1989.
Since World War II. We can talk about how... Well, it depends how far you want to go back, Alan. We can talk
I'm
about
talking about Costello gave $300 billion of surpluses. You produced $350 billion of debt. How do you look at the electorate and say, I'm credible? Well, it's not credible.
Well, let him answer it. We'll find out.
I mean, it depends how far Alan wants to go back. We can talk about how there was not one surplus in all of the Menzies years if you want. I mean, I'm prepared to go back as far as you want.
Now, just stick to today.
But I'll stick to more than today. I'll stick till tomorrow as well. Because what we need is a credible plan. A credible plan. These guys ran around before the election and said everything's fine, don't worry, just vote for Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey and everything will be fine.
I don't think anyone said it was fine.
Of course they did. Of course they did, Alan. They said we'll back to surplus. There'll be a confidence rush. Now we're dealing with this situation. We've got unemployment with a 6 in front of it and rising. We've got more unemployed people in Australia than any time since 1994. We've got confidence, economic confidence down 10% since the election. They said there'd be an adrenaline rush. We got through the global financial crisis with unemployment not going above 6%. We now have unemployment higher than New Zealand, the United States or the United Kingdom since the election. Now, this is the economic management that Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey delivered to Australia.
Answer my question, Chris. Are you going to raise taxes to retire the debt, or are you going to cut expenditure? And if you're going to cut expenditure, where? Are you going to cut it in social security? Do you have a plan? There's nothing in all those speeches that you've made that says anything about it. All you talk about is the Charter of Budget Honesty, and we're going to improve that.
Chris, I think you've got a point here.
That's not a little thing.
I think you've got a little thing
there.
You do need to spell this out. I said this to McCollum the other day. It seems to me you can't get away with what oppositions have traditionally got away with, and Tony Abbott got away with, absolutely got away with, saying nothing before an election except I won't touch health and I won't touch education, breaking all the promises.
Couldn't agree more.
You will have to say something. When are you going to say it?
Couldn't agree more.
When are you going to tell us? When are you going to tell us?
Let's deal with this for a minute.
But you said that yesterday. You're not going to touch pensions. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said you're not going to touch pensions. You said you're not going to touch Medicare. For God's sake, the health bill's $150 billion. Pensions are costing us $49 billion and going up by 6% every year. Now, they say that if we keep going the way they are, there'll be $70 billion. The pensions, you're not going to touch them. And then you said, I'm not going to touch university education. There'll be no $100,000 university.
Well, there won't be.
Well,
there won't be.
Well, of course there won't be. There's none now. But which area are you going to attack?
Well, let me say, I agree with Graham. I agree with you. Politics has changed. Why? Because too many oppositions have done the cheap and easy, just vote for us, it'll be all right. And we won't do that. We won't do that. We will have very detailed policies. This will be a contest of ideas that we want to win, for a couple of reasons. One, the Australian people deserve that. Australian people are over the sort of it's all easy political debate. I have said very deliberately and very carefully that there will be a need for revenue and expenditure decisions by the Labor Party to make sure that the deficit, that there's a credible pathway back to surplus. Hang on, Alan. You've had a good go, Alan. Now, I'm responding to both of your combined questions. Now, I agree that we need to outline very clearly to the Australian people, and not, in the last dying days of the election campaign, why. A, because the Australian people deserve it. B, because we want to win the election to do good things, and that means winning a mandate. We don't want to win an election and be where these jokers are 2 years later, being attacked by the Australian people. We want to be a good, solid, stable, long-term government for Australia. And that means being honest with people up front.
What are the cuts and when?
For 4 minutes, you've said nothing.
We need to know, for a start, let's just get a when out of you. When will we know where you're going to cut or where you're going to increase taxes?
Well, we've had what you can do is you can have thought bubbles, and you can say, oh, we'll have a pay parental leave scheme and we won't run it past the shadow cabinet, and it all comes back to haunt you, as we're seeing. Or you can have a proper, considered, developed process. That's what we've had. We haven't put out.
But when will we see the result of this proper, developed process? When? There's a simple word, when.
I haven't ever picked. The nation picks the national political team. But I've picked a couple of national sporting teams. And the first thing I do is to say, look at the scoreboard. I want to check how these people have performed in the past. You were a member of a government that ran up $190 billion of deficits in their first 5 years. $190 billion of deficits. How can you look down that lens?
And was one of only 3 advanced economies to avoid a recession.
Just a moment. We've got to pay the bills. How can you look down that lens and say to the people of Australia, you've seen my track record. My track record is we ran up the debts, 27 billion, 54, 47, 43, 18,
not
48.
Not
Hang on,
reasonable.
just a minute. How can you look down the lens and say, this is our track record, but don't worry, you give us another chance and we won't behave like that again.
But then again, there mightn't be the GFC, the financial crisis, the worst in 80 years.
It didn't last for 6 years.
The worst in 80 years.
It didn't last for 6 years.
Of course it didn't last for 6 years, but I tell you what, it wrecked the world for 3 of them.
Exactly.
Now, anyway, Chris, when? I'm asking a simple question, when, which you keep not answering. When?
No. We will be very clear, and we will be rolling out policies over the course of this year. I heard, yes, absolutely. I heard you say last night, they have to do it this year. Well, you're dead right. Of course we do. Of course we do. Now, let's be honest. I mean, when we announce policies, we want people to notice. We want a proper discussion. We would have been mad to announce a policy at any time in the last fortnight while the Liberal Party tear themselves apart. We will announce policies. We've already announced policies, and we'll announce more policies when they can make
not cuts, not cuts.
Well, there's a difference.
Cuts and taxes are what matters. Yeah, that's the big debate.
Absolutely.
Well, should I ask a question? I kind of come back to this point about picking the national team. because Tony Abbott wasn't responsible for 50,000 boat people. Tony Abbott wasn't responsible for 1,200 people being drowned. Who was the Minister for Immigration between September 2010 and February 2013 when all this was happening?
Well, you know the answer to that, and that'd be me.
OK, look down the lens and tell them.
And
50,000 people have arrived, 1,200 have drowned, and you are responsible for a blowout of $5.2 billion in border protection. $5.2 billion.
And let's talk. You talk about bipartisanship and why don't one party support another? I mean, we were the government who said this has got to stop. Let's take people to Malaysia. And what did Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison say? Not interested. Bipartisanship, don't care, you're on your own, and as a result, more people died after that because our plan got rejected by the Liberal and National parties.
You were the minister from 2010 to 2013.
I'm not going to cop any lectures about bipartisanship by these guys who sat around and said, well, Joe Hockey stood at the dispatch box and had tears in his eyes and said, we will never send a child overseas. And, of course, what they're doing is turning boats around while on his watch. That's hypocrisy, Alan, and I'll call it out where I see it.
OK. Well, look, there's one thing I will have to give him credit for, because we were both on an ABC show the other night, and I raised the issue about superannuation as to why people who are rich should get significant concessions in their superannuation, the amount that they take out of their income and put it into superannuation. Now, Chris somehow thought that was a thought bubble, so he grabbed it in the last couple of days.
Give yourself too much credit.
Yeah, I'm not, no, he grabbed it the last couple of, but I just thought, given that you're the Treasurer...
I think I'd said it for some time.
OK, well, I'm going to ask you two questions here. Firstly, if you're then going to change the tax structures, you might prove that you're a Treasurer of real merit and detail. Can you outline to everyone out there what are the various tax levels, at what point we pay so much in tax if you're an income earner? So, for example, at what point do we pay nothing for tax? No tax at all.
Well, you pay you get a tax-free threshold.
Yeah, what is it?
Well, you pay no tax.
Yeah, what is it?
Well, you get a low-income earner's tax offset.
Tax-free threshold.
You get a low-income earner's tax offset, which then provides...
What is the tax-free threshold?
Well, Alan, the tax... Hang on.
Well, I don't know.
Hang on. He's the Treasurer. I'm talking about detail. He doesn't know.
No.
What is the tax-free? There's a point up to which we don't pay any tax. What is that point?
And then you get a low-income tax offset, which provides a refund to low and middle-income earners, Alan,
at which
and
we
you
pay
raised
no
high-income superannuation.
I mean, the fellow's the Treasurer, Chris. I'll give you the answer. The answer's 18,200.
I thought it was 17, but whether it was 17 or 18,000, it doesn't matter.
Between 18,200, where do we go to the next point?
That's right.
Where is it?
Well, the bottom threshold is, of course, 15%.
Yeah, but hang on. But Graham, excuse me.
No, mate,
the man is the Treasurer of the country, and I'm asking him to explain.
He's the shadow treasurer. He's not the Treasurer. He's the Treasurer.
So we go from 18,000. Graham, hang on. Just a minute. This is a serious issue. The man is pretending he wants to be the Treasurer of Australia and doesn't know the tax threshold. So we go from 18,200
from you. I'm not going to cop
from you. Well, go on. You couldn't
putting
answer the first question.
Because I'm here to talk to you about serious issues.
What's the next threshold?
I'm not going to do a pop quiz for you,
What's the next threshold from 18,200?
With all due respect to you, I'm not going to do a pop quiz with you.
What is the next threshold from 18,200?
I've got ideas about where we should go with tax thresholds, but I don't know what each one of them is at the moment.
Well, you should.
But I do believe...
If you're going to argue about superannuation, you should, because it's central to the issue of superannuation. And that's the point I'm trying to make.
Central to the issue of superannuation. I can whack 25 grand in and wash tax out of it because I've got the spare cash to do it. And the battling families that the last budget wanted to whack don't have that sort of money. That I know. I don't need to know tax thresholds to know that is wrong.
You're not the Shadow Treasurer. I repeat. From 18,200, we then move to the next tax threshold. What tax do we pay between 18,200, and I'll tell you what it is. It's 37,001. So between 18, what do we pay?
15%.
We don't pay 15, we pay 19 cents in the dollar. When we go from 37,001 to 80,001, just a moment, there's a significant... Graham, excuse me.
It's proving nothing.
It is proving everything. We're talking about superannuation. We're talking about superannuation, and I'll explain why it's important.
Well, go explain why. Tell me why.
Well, if you give me a chance and stop prospering your ignorance, you might know. From 18 to 37,000, Chris didn't know the thresholds, you'll pay 19 cents in the dollar. If you shove that money over here into super, you pay 15 cents in the dollar. You're getting a discount of 4 cents.
Correct.
You go from 37 to 80, you go from 80 to 180. At 180, at 180 plus, you pay 45 cents in the dollar. If I stick my money in the bank.
Plus the Medicare levy.
In my, well, just forget the Medicare levy.
No, it's important.
Well,
if we're going to pick each other up on facts, if we're going to pick each other up,
well,
it's actually plus the Medicare levy.
Your Medicare levy.
No, you picked me up.
47 and a half.
You picked me up.
So we pay 45 cents.
Right.
Now, this is the point I'm making. This is the point I'm making. I then take my money out of that. I don't actually treat it as income to be taxed. I whack it into super. When I whack it into super, I'm only paying 15 cents in the dollar.
Yes.
So the discount for me is 30. This poor bugger down here,
can't do it.
between well, hang on, that's why the thresholds are important. Between 18,237, this poor bloke's getting a discount of 4 cents in the dollar, and he's not even earning $37,000, and I'm getting a discount of 30. Now, I'm asking you, what are you going to do to repair that massive inequity? Because this is costing us $49 billion a year.
Well, I agree.
It'd be pretty nice to ask the government what they're going to do about it, because they're the ones who are there.
Ask me.
They're the ones who, what are we going to do about it?
Ask me. And I said 15 before, and I was talking about the superannuation rate. I misunderstood. It's my mistake. What I agree with you. What I'm saying is that there is a real case for more superannuation equity when it comes to the taxation system. Now, we had plans which would have made $1 billion over 4 years. They were reversed by the current government. They say we've got a budget emergency, but we can afford to give $1 billion back to high-income earners on superannuation. Now, that's a good start. What we were doing is a good start. It's a modest measure. With all due respect to you, Alan, I was saying that long before you said it on Q&A, but I'm glad we've got something we can agree on, that there is a case for superannuation equity. Now, the government promised not to do this. Liberal and National Party said, we won't touch superannuation, not a little bit, not one change. And now they're sort of starting to edge away from that. But we have said that there is a strong case for more equity in the...
But will you change? See, let me just say to you, the latest retirement and retirement intentions survey, which I was reading last week by the Australian Bureau of Stats, found these words, quote, of all those who made contributions, 55% had received all or part of their super as a lump sum payment. Now, this is going to upset people out there, but simple question. Should people be able to take super as a lump sum payment? They then pay off the house, or they buy the new car, or they go around the world, and then they come back onto the pension.
Look, I think that's overstated as an issue. I think people should be able to take a lump sum. It's their money. They worked hard for it. They get a tax concession for it. I think the number of people who spend it all and go back on the age pension is very small, because most people know.
But they go back in part pensions, mate. That number's not very small.
And that means the BATS is paying twice, isn't it? Because as a taxman, he's paying for the concession that he got
people
in
know
putting it
that
into super.
Superannuation has got to last them a long time.
Can we just stop? Because we're going to have to go to a break. And I was going to bat on and have another argument with Alan, but if you don't mind, we'll keep you here.
I want to stay.
So we're good, because I haven't finished with you yet.
Excellent.
So I haven't got a word, you know. I mean, I'm battling here. But anyway, we have to go to a break here on Richo and Jones.
This is Richo and Jones, live on Sky.